The king in the north!
Dracarys.
I will hurt you for this.
I am the sword in the darkness.
Lion doesn't concern himself with the opinions of the sheep.
Let me give you some advice, bastard.
Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.
And so Queen Rhaenyra climbed the steps and seated herself on the Iron Throne. Legend has it that as she left the hall later, blood trickled down her legs and hands, proving the Iron Throne had spurned her. Nonsense. It's a chair made of steel blades. Rhaenyra had wanted it all her life and had sacrificed 2 sons for it. She likely gripped the damn thing too tight.
What is up, everybody? Jeremy Eisenfire here, and welcome to the channel. The hit HBO series, House of the Dragon, is based off George R. R. Martin's novel, Fire and Blood, a history of the Targaryen kings from the reign of Aegon the Conqueror to Aegon III. And one thing House of the Dragon I thought did extremely well in its opening season was giving some of these characters some much-needed backstory that was maybe left out of Fire and Blood, and none more so than King Viserys Targaryen. Much like on House of the Dragon, in Fire and Blood, King Viserys' death is the catalyst that kicks off the Dance of the Dragons. But one thing Fire and Blood doesn't exactly explain is exactly how King Viserys dies, only that his health begins to fail. House of the Dragon, on the other hand, was able to expand upon this a little bit in a very clever way, I might add, and offers up a little bit of an explanation as to what exactly killed Viserys, at least in the show version. And given where House of the Dragon is eventually heading, I'm starting to wonder if another character might share Viserys' fate, in a theory that I call the Curse of the Iron Throne. King Viserys was born in 77 AC at King's Landing, and reigned from the time of 103 AC to 129 AC, after the Great Council named him the next heir to the Iron Throne after King Jaehaerys had lost both of his sons. Viserys' reign would ultimately go on to be long and prosperous, with many considering House Targaryen to be at the very height of their power during his reign. Until one day, however, when King Viserys would go on to slip and cut his hand to the bone on the Iron Throne, which caused a nasty infection to set in that almost claimed his life if it wasn't for the quick, swift actions of Maester Gerardus in removing 2 of his infected fingers. Something that also happens to Viserys in House of the Dragon after he cuts himself on the Iron Throne, ultimately leading to him losing 2 fingers as well. And this, of course, comes after he had already cut himself on the Iron Throne once before. We see in the very first episode of House of the Dragon, the Maesters are tending to a wound on Viserys' back that looks awfully infected that he attributes to getting cut on the Iron Throne. And these cuts would ultimately be the undoing of Viserys as we start to see him slowly decay and rot throughout the remainder of the series. And thanks to an interview with House of the Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal during Season 1, we find out that Viserys was suffering from a rare form of leprosy which was brought on by the cuts he sustained from the Iron Throne, with Ryan also going on to explain that they thought that this would be an interesting aspect to add to the show, that someone cutting themselves on the Iron Throne could potentially lead to leprosy, hence the Curse of the Iron Throne, which is a very interesting idea and could go on to be quite a useful plot device as well, and gives Fire and Blood book readers a more definitive reason for what really kills Viserys. But will Viserys be the only victim of the Curse of the Iron Throne, or could his death have been the foreshadowing for another that is going to share his fate? To find this out, we now flash forward all the way to the Dance of the Dragons when we arrive at the fall of King's Landing. After months of bloody battle between the 2 warring factions of House Targaryen, Rhaenyra and Aegon II, Rhaenyra finally gains the upper hand and takes the city of King's Landing, in large part thanks to the brilliant planning of Daemon Targaryen. And after a lifetime of waiting, the Iron Throne is finally within Rhaenyra's grasp. Little did she know, however, her reign would be short-lived. After finally winning the Iron Throne, Rhaenyra climbs it for the first time and seats herself. But upon her leaving, everyone in court starts to notice a trickle of blood start to follow her footsteps. And in Fire and Blood, this indicates that the Iron Throne had spurned Rhaenyra and her reign would not be long. But in the show, I think this could potentially mean something else. If getting cut on the Iron Throne led to Viserys ultimately receiving a rare form of leprosy, could Rhaenyra potentially share the same fate? When Rhaenyra does eventually climb the Iron Throne, she doesn't cut herself just once. She is repeatedly cutting herself almost every time she sits the Iron Throne during her short reign. Could this ultimately lead to the curse of the Iron Throne claiming Rhaenyra as well? Now, anyone who has read Fire and Blood, of course, knows exactly when, why, and how Rhaenyra will go on to meet her end, which I do think we will ultimately see in the show as well, but on the show version, when we eventually get to that scene, could it ultimately be a withered and weakened Rhaenyra infected by leprosy that ultimately meets her fate in the end? I suppose only time will tell, but it could be a pretty interesting subplot for the character of Rhaenyra in the later stages of the Dance of the Dragons. And who knows, maybe even the leprosy will play a part in Rhaenyra's fall from grace in the first place. And Viserys himself is not the only Targaryen monarch who potentially met his end due to the curse of the Iron Throne, especially when you consider the fate of Maegor the Cruel. Now, while Maegor the Cruel didn't exactly meet his end due to leprosy like Viserys did, it seems that the curse of the Iron Throne may have claimed Maegor nonetheless. In the books, there is a standing theory that the Iron Throne judges all who sit upon it, and that if the throne deems you unworthy, it is only a matter of time until your reign comes to a swift end. And if there is any truth to this curse, Maegor the Cruel is exactly the type of king that the throne may judge. Towards the end of Maegor's rule, all but Maegor could clearly see that the realm was turning against him, as the great houses like Lannister, Tyrell, and Arryn all came out to oppose Maegor the Cruel. And in response, Maegor called one final war council where he summoned the remainder of his bannermen, of which there were very few left at this point. Maegor, however, would refuse to surrender quietly, even when his own bannermen suggested that he give up the throne and take the Black. And then after beheading the lord that suggested so, Maegor continued his war council, not knowing that it would ultimately be his last. Now, when it comes to the actual death of Maegor the Cruel, very little is known, as he was said to be alone in the throne room at the time. Yet, the next morning, however, he was discovered by Queen Eleanor seated upon the Iron Throne with his robes covered in blood and his wrists slashed, with a spike impaled through the back of his neck from one of the swords on the Iron Throne. How Maegor ultimately ended up that way, none can say. Some say he was killed by one of his Kingsguard, some say it was Queen Eleanor herself that did the deed, and some even say that he was killed by the Iron Throne itself, ultimately making him the first victim of the curse of the Iron Throne. Yet Maegor would not be the only Targaryen king to have some unfortunate run-ins with the blades on the Iron Throne, as Aerys II Targaryen can certainly attest. Aerys II, also known as the Mad King, would go on to cut himself probably more than any other Targaryen king to ever sit the Iron Throne, so much to the point that he would become known as the Scab King, as his legs and arms were constantly covered in half-healed cuts from the Iron Throne. Overall, the Iron Throne is an incredibly interesting part of the A Song of Ice and Fire world, and ultimately we might never know if there is truly a curse of the Iron Throne. And part of me actually likes the ambiguity of that. And definitely let me know down in the comment section below, do you think there is an actual curse of the Iron Throne, or could it potentially just be a series of unfortunate events that plagued Viserys and others? Ultimately, getting that definitive ending to what really killed Viserys on the show was definitely a satisfying conclusion to his story arc. But part of me could never shake the feeling that maybe this was foreshadowing for it to happen to Rhaenyra as well, as we all know Rhaenyra cuts herself many times on that same throne. Either way, I don't think it will be the ultimate end for Rhaenyra's character. I think her end will come the same way that it did in the book, but this could certainly be an interesting subplot to that ending. But that is going to do it for us today. Just a quick breakdown on my Curse of the Iron Throne theory, and definitely let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Do you think Rhaenyra could potentially suffer a similar fate as Viserys, or will he be the only victim of the Curse of the Iron Throne? And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit a like on your way out, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications to stay up to date on all of our upcoming content. And as always, I want to give a huge thank you to everybody out there for watching, and we will see you on the next one.
The King in the North!
Dracarys.
I will hurt you for this.
I am the sword in the darkness.
Lion doesn't concern himself with the opinions of the sheep.
Let me give you some advice, bastard.
Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.